At my age, I'm allowed to do what I like.
That's true. And I want to say, Mrs. T, that Marlene and I, she couldn't be here tonight because of her Parkinson's. But we're very privileged and honored to have been taught and learned about the Lord Jesus Christ, watching you from back in the Bible school year when we were here in 1971, 72. And some of those pictures, of course, rang bells in my memory. And you have been an example, and we often say, Marlene often says, her prototype. Endurance, perseverance, we didn't think of the literal things when we watched you, and you taught us in the corridors what we learned in the classroom here. And so we want to thank you, and I say that from our hearts on behalf of Marlene and myself. But then so many people have had their lives influenced and impacted by seeing other people change as a result of the ministry the Holy Spirit had through you to them, and them passing it on, they passing it on. Thank you for what you're going to share. And I'll sit by.
Well, welcome. I never thought I'd be here at my great age, but God had a reason for it, I think, because when I first came to the auction for this great place, I thought, what on earth have we done? How are we going to manage everything? I have many, many, many questions, as you can imagine. But on the 11th of September, in my little diary, it says on the outside, see September 11th, 1946, Joan's old diaries. And what did I put in my diary? Mother's birthday. Auction. Bought Capernwray Hall. $7,350. $7,350, which we didn't have. My husband had made me sell my saving stamps, sold everything that we could to get a little bit for the deposit. Wasn't very much. But on Wednesday, it was full moon. That was great. It was also Mother's birthday. And for her birthday, at the auction, I bought Capernwray Hall for $7,350. Pounds. Sorry, pounds. I live in America now. Pounds. And I had prepared myself to go to the what do we call it? The auction, just because my husband told me to. And he reminded me more than once that it says women should obey their husbands. I like it better in an amplified. Women should adapt to your husband. So I spent my whole life adapting. And I think even in his absence, I'm still adapting to what he said, what he did, what he preached. Not very much what he told me to do, but I picked it up as we went along. But it was an amazing day when we came here to Capernwray Hall, looking a little different from what it is now, thankfully. I made some notes, but I'm not very good at preaching, and I don't read my notes afterwards properly, so I can only tell you what I thought, what I'm thinking. Last night, 2 men mentioned that their wives had died. And I look back on the story of Capernwray, and I wonder why I didn't die years ago. I'm 95, and it's pretty ancient. I don't know why God has kept me alive so long when young men like last night have become widowers. And I felt very moved last night afterwards to think that God kept me alive till now, and they lost their wives so young. I nearly cried about that, but not quite, because I know God's story is God's story. And I look back on the story of Capernwray, and I remember that Ian was unable to do the bidding, so he said I should come and do the bidding. I'd never been to an auction, so it wasn't much use. But I said, I'll go if somebody could come with me. So he had a friend called Doug Stockin, and he and his wife lived in Nottingham where we lived, and so I asked him if he'd come. He thought it was a crazy idea, as I did, but we knew we had to obey. My husband, as you all know, was the sort you had to obey, if many of you found that out. So I thought, well, I better go to the auction and get Doug to bid. And so then Ian drew any bit of money he had anywhere, including my saving stamps and all that I had. And he produced all that he'd gained by being in the army for the whole of the war. And he didn't instruct us what to do, but he hoped that we wouldn't have to pay too much. So Doug Stockin, who is a very good friend, had a business of his own. He said, yes, I'll come with you, but I think it's crazy. But I'll do what Ian says because of our friendship. So we got in his very nice, what is a very fine? Jaguar. We got in his Jaguar. And his wife and he sat in the front, and I sat in the back, and I was expecting son number 2. And I whispered to her, tell him to drive carefully, because I'm expecting a baby. So he did drive carefully, and I was very proud to be in the Jaguar. We got here, and we had to find somewhere to stay. Well, this was very soon after the war. It was very hard to find any place, but in the next little village, we found a pub. Well, I'd never been in a pub before, let alone sleep in one. So we slept in the pub, and I heard the men downstairs drinking and talking about this big sale there was going to be tomorrow. And they wondered who would get the hall and all the farms connected. And so in the morning, we came to see the place, and the auction was to be the following day. So during the war, they had a school evacuated here, some kids from Lancaster, just in case the bombing should come there, and so the school had been here. And it was obvious because there were little funny notes on the doors and windows and signs of children being there, and a little row of wash basins in the kitchen where they'd put them for the kids to wash their hands in. So I came to see it, and the lady who took me round was the wife of the headmaster. So she said that it was a very difficult place to live in and all the bad things about it. But when she asked me what we were going to do with it, and I told her, she said, oh, I hope you get it. And I said, I hope you don't. So that was a good idea for her. And we stayed in a little hotel down the end of the road, and we wanted breakfast at 8 because our bit of furniture was coming and we needed to be at the hall in time for the auction. No, we hadn't wanted to take the furniture. But anyway, we came here and we went to the auction, and the price that Ian had said we should not go beyond 7,000, I think it was, which he'd gathered together by saving his war, keeping his war service savings together, and for little bits that we all had, and everybody in the family had to give it up, and we prepared for the auction. The night before, Doug Stockin walked around the village, and believe it or not, he bumped into the auctioneer. And the auctioneer said, oh, you're coming to the big auction tomorrow? He said, yes. And so he said, what are you wanting it for? And he told him. He said, I'll do my best for you. Do my best for you. You're not supposed to do that if they're auctioneers, but when we got there, we found that the owner of the whole property owned 12 farms. I need a little bit of water. Yes. He owned 12 farms and and was in a very high position in the government. And so the lady who took me round said, we've had all these children here. I said, yes, I can see that. And she said, why do you want it? And I told her. And she happened to be a Christian lady. And she was very pleased. And she said, I'll pray about it. I'll pray about it. So there was somewhere away, somewhere, realizing that this was going to be a very important purchase. Well, we saw over what was left of the hall, and there were signs of the school being here, scribbling on the walls, and everything was a little bit shabby, very, very shabby. And so we saw around, and I wondered what on earth Ian was planning to do with it. He said we could go up to, I think he must have said 7,000. And Doug Stockin, who had walked around the village, not any good? Oh, thank you. And when I looked around it, I felt more uncertain that we could ever possibly do anything with the place. I mean, the big rooms were still there, huge, huge bedrooms, and then little maids' rooms, and then kitchen maids' rooms, and then they'd had 7 gardeners, and they'd had all kinds of nice things about the place, but very, very worn out. So we went to the auction, and we had a seat at the very front, which wasn't really fair because all the farmers now wanted to buy their own farms. And so there were a lot of people in the town hall in Lancaster, and they were planning to get their farms instead of having to pay rent to Colonel Martin. So it was pretty packed, and people were very interested. And we had a seat at the front, which really wasn't fair, but okay. And I knew that we shouldn't go beyond this, whatever the 7,000 and something was. So the bidding started with the main hall, and then they went to the different farms and Barrack Hall, which was also in the estate down the road. So we sat there in the front, and I whispered to the Lord, don't let us get it. Because I saw what the work was going to be, and my mother and my sister and I were hardly capable of preparing the house for 100 or so young people. So I was not very enthusiastic. But the bidding started, and it was very interesting because the night before, Doug Stockin, who was going to do the bidding, he met the auctioneer in the street, in the village, and he took him home. And he said in his home, which was very beautiful, down in the village, he said, you want that big house tomorrow? And Doug said, yes, we do. He said, I'll do my best for you. Now, anybody who's got that job isn't supposed to give anyone privilege, but we sat in the very front of the town hall at Lancaster to do our bidding. So it started very quickly, and it rose, and until it got to our limit, which Ian had set. And as probably most of you know, I said, just go a little further. And that was a good title that one of my daughters-in-law thought up. And it was true, we did go just a little further. And we didn't know until later that there was an older lady with her son on the right-hand side, and she whispered, "Don't go any further." So she wanted it for something else, and there weren't many more people otherwise who wanted it. So it finally came to us. And we went a little further, and I wrote in my diary, this big diary, I wrote, "Mother's birthday, auction, bought Capernwray Hall, 7,350. So I went a little bit above what we should have paid. And then I wrote Psalm 31:19. When I got back home, I checked what that verse was, and it was a verse that some of you may know. "How great is thy goodness, which thou hast laid up for them that fear thee, which thou hast wrought for them that trust in thee before the sons of men." Good King James. And then it said at the end, "Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all ye that hope in the Lord." We came out of that auction, and I leant against the door at the back of the building, and I said, "Doug, what have we done? This is terrible. Do you think we're right? This is awful. What have we done?" And I grumbled all the way back to Nottingham, where I then lived. Didn't thank God. I blamed him. And I came home, and my mother was staying with us. And Mother said, "Well, how did it go?" I said, "Well, we bought it." She said, "Where exactly is it?" I said, "Not too far from the Lake District." "Oh, it's going to be all right," she said. And you know why she said it? Because she had a grandfather in the Lake District in Keswick who had always talked to her about Jesus. And her parents didn't, but that grandfather did. And she said, "It's going to be all right." I said, "How do you know?" And she said, "Because it's not far from the Lake District. It'll be all right." So that was how we got Capernwray Hall. And Ian was delighted, absolutely delighted. He was in the Army of Occupation at the end of the war in the area where the Germans were. And he had already got to know the Germans. And so when I told him about it, about the price we paid and where it was located, he was absolutely delighted and couldn't wait to come, and got permission to come 2 or 3 days after we bought it. And his father and his brother, being architects, they said, "Oh, we'll come and see what it's like and if it's really worth the purchase." And though they weren't really true believers at the time, they thought it was wonderful. 2 days later, Ian turned up. He ran all around the buildings, and he went into every room, and he said, "We put 6 in that room, 9 in that room, 10 in that room," until he got up to about 100 or so. I said, "Are we having 100 people here? Look at it, it's dropping, it's terrible, there's so much to do." "Oh, don't bother about that." And he went back in the Army of Occupation, and he had the job of turning Germans out of their homes so that they could put soldiers in their houses in Felbert in the Rhineland where he was stationed. And he wrote to me and said, "Please pray for the Germans that I'm having to turn out of their houses, because it's not really fair that we have to let them go away." So he said, "Please pray I won't cause too much inconvenience to the Germans." Well, I thought they've certainly given us a little inconvenience. And I don't think that's fair. But he loved the Germans. And God gave him that love. And in an amazing way, he chose he had a whole list of homes that he could go to and factories he could go to, where all the men who were coming to reside in that part of Germany. And the first two were both Christians, Christian families, Baptists, I think they were. And the first one, as some of you who read the book will know, that he got a letter from the first one saying, "Thank you for taking care of us, and we hope you'll be happy here." And it became our home from home in Germany. So God answered prayers in wonderful ways. And I don't know how far to go with you, but it was an amazing experience to be amongst those whom everybody hated, but for whom God gave us such a love that there are, how many are Germans here? Oh, yes, lots. And you love to come to America, and you love to come to England, and you love Germany too, and all the other countries. So I am amazed to see how God has worked everything out. So we moved in the coldest winter in living memory. We bought it in, yes, it was in September. And my sister and I pretty worked day and night, scrubbing and cleaning and painting and finding rooms. And Chris was 3 years old, so he ran around everywhere, and he had great fun, didn't you? And he worked, we had some men in to make wardrobes. There were no wardrobes in any of the smaller rooms, and so he ran around and came one day and said, "I found a new room." And sure enough, he had found one that we hadn't noticed. And he was very much part of the process from then on. And we were grateful to God that he didn't make it too awkward for us. I don't know how much more to tell you, because that seems almost like enough, but you probably want to know a little bit more. Just a little bit more. So anyway, that was September, and we worked all through the winter, and I remember scrubbing and cleaning here, there, and everywhere, and trying to paint a bit of something on the walls. I remember it's called the withdrawing room, the little room off the main entrance. What do you do it now? What is it now? Pardon? Dining room 2? Yes, dining room 2. 3, yeah. And so we went from room to room, and then Ian let a few friends that he knew about, told him all about it, and some people gave this, and some people gave that, and people gave us the old blackout curtains. None of you will remember the blackout, when we had to make everything dark, and we weren't allowed to let little lights go through the sides of the curtains, and men came round. You've got a light in your window, you must turn it, you know. And the first thing I hated about the war was when the lights of the cars were dimmed. There's nobody here who will remember that, but when you had a car at the beginning of the war and the bombs were coming, you had hardly a light in your cars, and that was very difficult. And we were given an old car, and then finally, when we opened, there were 15 beds. The beds came from the army, and we had them all in the courtyard, and they were all khaki from the army, and so we had our first staff man who'd been in the army himself and wasn't too well and needed some work to do. He painted every one of those old iron bedsteads with two colors of cream paint, because we didn't want to keep the khaki color. And his name was Geoffrey Gilboy, and he became our first driver when somebody gave us what was called a shooting break, and he drove the shooting break, and so he picked up the first guest, and her name was Mary, yes, from Yorkshire. And so I said to Geoffrey, yes, you have to pick up our first guest. And he drove into Carnforth, and she got in the old shooting brake, and he brought her back. And he found me somewhere, and he said, which room do I take her to? Oh, I think there's a bed in room 5, so go to room 5. And so he took her to room 5, and she had a little suitcase with her. And so then he said, what do I do with her now? I said, oh, take her for a little walk maybe until you go for the next guest. And they've been walking ever since. They married. Not the first by any means, not the last. But they married, and one day they brought their 5 children to show where they met in the lounge on that seat by that mirror, and there they proposed that very year. And she was with you, wasn't she? I got a photograph of her the other day, and he lasted for a long time, now in the hospital, I think. But she was our first guest, and he was our first staff. And so then we gathered some more people around, and we finally got a girl who'd been in the army in the same company as Ian was, and she was our first, she directed everything, I don't know what you call it, and then we slowly gathered up a cook from Liverpool and another, we managed to get somebody to do the typing, and she set up her little typewriter, and she didn't stay very long because she said Ian kept her too hard at work. He didn't mind working at midnight and half into the night, but she didn't like it. But we've had wonderful secretaries over the years, and God has blessed. So I don't know how much further to take you.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
And then several from the floor may want to ask you a question.
Yes.
It's not from the beginning story, but over the years, we know you've been a mother and wife, and you've raised your children here. Maybe would you mind giving us a comment or two about the blessing of raising children at a Torchbearers Centre?
Yes, it was very hard.
Yes. Other kids may not be as naughty, though.
No, it was wonderful for them. I think they could talk more about it than I could. But I must say they were totally neglected, just about. Yes, it's very interesting. I've been around many of the Torchbearers Centres now and noticed how in some places the children have really had a part in it. Ian, of course, began to, after we'd been there some years and got more and more people, of course, Stuart Briscoe came on the scene, but before that, I think it was Van Doren who started the first Bible school. Ian had a friend in London who was a bit hurt by some glass that was in the face, but he was used to working with children, with boys. He was at a boys' orphanage, I think. And Ian met him in London sometime or other and said, why don't you come up to Capernwray and help us with this new place we've got? So his name was Mr. Van Doren from Holland. Yes, Holland?
Well, there was a Dutch name in England, like London.
Was he from London? Yeah. Oh. Anyway, Mr. Van Doren came to be our first, when we began the first Bible school, but I think it was Stuart Briscoe who suggested the Bible school during the winter months. And so we had this Mr. Van Doren, and he was a real evangelist too, but he was made the first director of the Bible school. And there weren't many. We had about, and I think in the first Bible school, we were nearly all German. I think we had about 20 or so.
How did your kids fit into them?
Yes, I'll tell you.
Running around. I remember Andy was about 11.
Yes, I'll tell you in just a minute.
Rascal.
But it was very funny. We had never thought of a Bible school. Bible school? That's supposed to be a holiday place. But it was the Germans who asked for more teaching, and that was a joy to us. And so Mr. Van Doren from Holland, you say? Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not very well prepared. Well, I tried to be, but I've lost my notes currently. So Mr. Van Doren was the principal, and we had, I think, about 20 Germans who came to the Bible school, and I was checking the lights in the main bedrooms. At bedtime it was about 11 o'clock, and I came down to room 15, room 14, and then I saw two students, arms around each other, kissing, hugging. And so I went back to Van and I said, Van, we've got to have rules in this Bible school. We can't have couples like that getting together when they come to a Bible school. He said, will you take care of it? I said, no, I think you should take. No, you do it. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. So I had to go and separate them out and say that I said, this isn't what Bible school is meant to be, so you may not behave like that. So then something else happened, and he said, yes, we needed something. I just can't remember what it was. And I said, look, Mr. Van Doren, you've got to do this. And he said, no, you do it. So I said, I'm not here to do those things, you are. So it was a very difficult first Bible school. But thank God most of you have been to our Bible schools now, and I'm sure some of you have hugged one another.
Thank you.
But,
Are there any questions from the floor?
In those days, it wasn't the best thing to do.
You'll have to shout out the question if you have a question you'd like Mrs. T to comment on. A little louder.
No questions. Good.
All right, I have another question. Oh, you have a question. There we go.
The food? Yes, that was another difficulty. Yes, we were rationed for food. We were the last country to be de-rationed at the end of the war. And it was very complicated because they insisted that you count how many cups of tea or coffee or whatever it was you served, and you had to go back to the Home Office and find out how much you could have for the following week. So the rationing was very, very difficult. And fortunately, my mother was living in Ireland at the time, and Irish don't like cheese very much, so we got a lot more cheese ration from. So the students got lots of cheese and something in their food, and we gradually got through those terrible years when we were the last country in the world to be unrationed after the war, which I thought was a bit unfair. And the Americans got food sent to the Germans, but not to the British, unfortunately.
Those Americans.
Yeah.
One thought I would like you to comment on is, although
Sure.
Marlene asked me to ask you who is the most interesting person you've ever met at Capernwray Hall, I'm going to ask you, because many men in the staff of the various centers travel a lot. Seems, well, yes, that's the ministry. Well, can you make a comment on that? Your husband traveled quite a bit, didn't he? And you were alone, and I've heard you talk about it from time to time casually. Could you make a couple of comments on that?
Yes. After we'd lived in here for quite a long time, I don't know how many years now, Ian was invited, first of all, to come to Canada to preach at a Bible school. And then he began to be invited to some churches in America. And so it went on like that. And then he decided, well, I had to take over the kitchen at one stage. And a girl who had been in the kitchen had left, and the other one had been ill. And so when I took over the kitchen, Andy was a little boy in a pram, and it was holiday time. It was September, when the staff had finished for the summer and they had a break in September. And I said to the girl who was with me in the kitchen, I think we'll just go to the little meeting in the meeting hall, because we have only staff here, and there's a German boy going to preach this morning. So we'll just leave the kitchen and we'll go and quietly sit at the back. And so we went to the meeting, and then I came back to the kitchen and I found the smoke meeting me at the door, because I had left the fat fryer on. And the old cook had always said, there's nothing that turns the fat fryer off. It's time we got another one. I said, oh, don't worry, it'll be all right. And the kitchen was already on fire. So that was a little bit difficult. It wasn't any fun, because it finally was going up to the ceiling to who's in room 19? Yes. It went up to the floor of 19, so I called the fire brigade, and the fire brigade had practiced many times to come to this big house, and they said it wasn't because of the house, because of the people, because we were by then having a couple of hundred sometimes. And so the fire brigade could come in, I think it was 8 or 9 minutes. It was pretty quick from Carnforth. And they began putting the water all over the place. And so the few staff that were left and the boy that was preaching, they came out, and water met them at what was then the meeting room by the dining room. And it was a pretty awful moment when I saw the fire brigade come, but at least we got the fire out. And I said, well, at last we'll be able to have one room with its own bathroom, because the smoke had reached, the fire had reached up there. And so now you have your lovely rooms with not too many people and your washing right. It's changed a lot, but in those early days it was so interesting to find who was coming and going and what we had to do, and then of course everybody helped everybody else, and if the office girls were finished, they say, oh, let's go and help them in the dining room. And then we had this washing machine, and you put one cup on this whirring a bit of something, and 1 cup at a time. And when we first started, we thought we'd be very elegant and have little cups of coffee at the end of the meal. So I would say to them in the wash-up, don't forget the coffee cups are coming. So there were tough days. There were long days. We didn't have any hours. You just worked, and then you would help somebody else who needed help. And it was amazing how God took us through many experiences.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Did you quote from or read from Psalm 37 at the beginning? Was it Psalm 37?
Psalm 31.
Psalm 31.
How great is thy goodness, which thou hast laid up for them that fear thee, which thou hast wrought for them that trust in thee before the sons of men. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all ye that hope in the Lord.
Thank you. It's a great blessing. I'm going to read some two or three verses that have come to us because of the witness of your life. And obviously we would read it other times, but this is what we've been reminded of, and it's been a ministry to us to watch you, to listen to you, and to learn. It really has. And it's Psalm 37, 3, 4, and 5, which we probably have memorized. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land, or stay put in the land, and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your judgment as the noonday, the justice of God. And you've been an example over the long haul. We need that example. And the Lord has given you what it takes, but you have put your mind and heart to it, and it's been a testimony to all of us. Thank you so very, very much.
Well, thank you very, very much. I listened to 2 men last night whose wives have died. Why didn't he take me? Why doesn't he take me now at 95? I've decided the other day it must be because he promised if I would be of good courage, that he would strengthen my heart, whatever happened. And it was a blessing to me last night to hear those men. And I feel ashamed that I'm being allowed to live to 95, and they had their wives gone long before that. But they were a blessing to me because they've carried on. And I trust I'll carry on to the day I go to be with the Lord. And I look forward to that more than I can say.
Amen. Thank you.